Hey you guys, what's up? Really excited to be bringing you this video. This is the first part of my 300 subscriber special. I decided that I'm going to do the same thing I did last time and make it into a Blast from the Past special where I play some of the World Championship decks with my friends. But this time I figured that I should explain some of the decks. Before I just get into it, I am using the Swampert and Gardevoir decks from the 2004 World Championship set. They're the other two decks that weren't featured last time. If you know what those decks do and you're really familiar with the card pool, then go ahead and skip to the next video. But if you're not, make sure you check out this video or the links in the description box down below. Those will be Bulbapedia links. Make sure you thank Adam Keebler. He's Polytoad666 on HeyTrainer and a bunch of other sites. And he's a really cool guy, so thank him for putting those together. Those are really nice resources just for everyone. But let's get into the cards in these two decks and what they do. We'll start off with the Swampert deck, and the Swampert deck runs two different Swamperts. It runs a Swampert from Ruby and Sapphire, which is just a regular Swampert, not an EX. It has 110 HP, which is pretty solid for the time, and it has a Poké Power that's kind of like Celebi Prime's, but a little different. It's called Water Call, and it lets you attach an extra water energy to your active Pokemon during your turn, and it can be used from the bench, unlike Celebi. But then it can't be used if you're under special conditions. But so that's a really nice power, really similar to Celebi's except for the active thing, and then the being able to use it has to be on the active Pokemon, but Swampert can be on the bench. It also has an attack for two water energy and two colorless energy called Hypnosplash that does 50 damage and puts the opponent to sleep, which is really good for two-shotting things like Groudon and Gardevoir and a couple other things in the format, especially if you hit the sleep and you just can basically two-shot them without taking damage. We also run Swampert EX in this deck, which is a fighting type Swampert actually, which is kind of cool. It gives type diversity and has a big boost at 150 HP, which is pretty standard for stage 2 EXs. It has a one attack for one colorless energy called Hyper Pump that does 20 plus 20 additional damage for each basic energy. So unless you have multiple special energy attached to him, he's essentially doing 20 times with a cap of 100 damage max. And then he has a second attack called Crushing Wave, which for a water and two colorless does 40 damage snipe and gives you a coin flip. If heads, you discard an energy from that Pokemon, so that does some really interesting stuff. Onto the Gardevoirs. The first Gardevoir has 100 HP and has a Poké Power and a 1 energy attack. Its Poké Power lets you search your deck for a Psychic Energy and attach it to one of your Pokemon. You then put 2 damage counters on that Pokemon. So kind of reminiscent of Camerupt, except it's from the deck, which is really cool and lets you play your deck really well. And it also puts 2 damage counters on the specific Pokemon you're attaching energy to. It then has an attack called Energy Burst, which for one Psychic does 10 times the total amount of energy between Gardevoir and the active Pokemon. So kind of a little reminiscent of Mewtwo EX, but not exactly. Then we have Gardevoir EX, who is another EX with 150 HP, and 2 fantastic attacks. The first one is Feedback, which for a Psychic and a Colorless does damage counters equal to the number of cards in your opponent's hand, and if you're familiar with this format, people tend to have really large hands, so that is a really devastating attack. Its second attack, Psystorm, abuses the boost energy, which we'll talk about later, but does 10 times the total amount of energy in play on both your and your opponent's Pokemon, so that can be really good, especially in matchups like Swampert, where your opponent needs a lot of energy on the field to do well. Then both decks run this card, Dunsparce. Dunsparce is a really great starter. His first attack, Striking One, is kind of like Collector. You get out 3 basics for your attack, and then you may switch one of them with Dunsparce into the active spot. His second attack, Sudden Flash, does 10 damage and a Paralysis Flip, which in a format where occasionally you need to buy a couple of turns, switches aren't played in as high of counts, usually 1 to 2, maybe 3, in a really, really switch-heavy deck, but there's no Junk Arm. And in just a slow format where Paralysis in the beginning and even in the middle game when you need to stall can be really groundbreaking, his second attack is still a really good attack considering what Dunsparce is as a card. So both decks run those, and 3 to 4-ish I think are the numbers for those. And then both decks also run the same draw engine, and that engine includes Delcatty from Ruby and Sapphire, who has a fantastic Poké Power that lets you discard an energy card from your hand, and then you get to draw 3 cards. It also has an attack that does 10 damage times the number of energy on Delcatty, and if you're playing doubles, it's Delcatty and your other Pokemon that you have active, because you have 2 active in doubles at the same time, but usually not too relevant of a kind of wording. And then we have Magneton, the second part of this draw engine, who lets you discard a card from your hand and then get back 2 basic energy from your discard. So you can see the synergy between those 2 cards pretty easily. It's a pretty strong draw engine. Pretty cool, actually. I really enjoyed playing the Magneton Delcatty draw engine. And then we also have a common pool of supporters in these 2 decks. Steven's Advice is probably one of the most powerful supporters ever printed. It lets you draw a card for each Pokemon your opponent has in play, but you can't play it if you have 7 or more cards in your hand. But this is one of the cards that really leads to big hand sizes in this format. You also play Oracle in both decks. These Oracle lets you put 2 cards on the top of your deck, and so that's before cutting, or after cutting rather, sorry. So if your opponent cuts, you then put those 2 cards on. You can see how that really pairs well with Delcatty. Essentially, it works out like a Twins, and you get an extra card on top of that. So it's a really, really, really powerful supporter. Both of these decks are running Copycat as well, I believe. Copycat's really good in this format because, again, you have big hand sizes. It should be a card you're familiar with. Additionally, Professor Elm's Training Method is run in both these decks, and it's another card you should be familiar with. It just lets you search for an evolution Pokemon as your supporter. Underground Expedition was recently in the format and just got rotated out, I think, last year, or for this season, basically, and lets you grab 2 of the bottom 4 cards from your deck. Desert Shaman is a direct reprint of Judge, so again, another familiar card, probably. Ancient Technical Machine Rock is a really cool one. It kind of mimics Jirachi's attack. I believe that was called Stardust Song. Maybe that was its Pokepower. Time Hollow. There we go. Time Hollow is the attack. And it lets you devolve all of your opponent's Pokemon rather than Jirachi's being dependent on the number of energy you have. So that's a really, really strong card. It can get you some really interesting funky KOs, and that's played in the Swampert deck. And then the last card I'm going to mention is the Boost Energy. Boost Energy is 3 colorless energy that you can attach to one of your evolved Pokemon, but it is discarded at the end of that turn, or if they somehow become devolved in the middle of their turn. I've never really figured out how that one's going to happen, or your opponent would do it at least. I suppose you could play your own de-evolution spray, but that would probably be ill-advised. So those are the cards in those decks. Again, check the links down below. I think I left a couple of things out, like the Suicune EX, and I'm not really sure if they come into play or not. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you guys enjoy the next video I come out with, this 300 subscriber battle, even more. Make sure you rate, like, comment, subscribe, and I will keep coming at you with more videos in the future.